The court has reviewed the evidence. The motion to suppress is hereby denied. This court will not tolerate any further disruptions. Is that understood?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. The current policy is failing. We need immediate evidence-based reforms.
What? No, that's not true. I didn't do it, I swear. This is a mistake.
Fairfield County Superior Court. A gray Monday morning in March. The fluorescent lights above the defense table buzzed with the quiet indifference of a room that had witnessed every shade of human darkness. But what was about to unfold inside Courtroom 7 would leave even the most seasoned court reporters struggling for words. Two young men sat side by side at the defense table, their resemblance so exact that the bailiff had initially checked their names twice against the intake log. Caleb and Connor Whitfield, 24 years old. Identical twins, identical posture, identical expressions of calculated composure. They had denied everything, every question, every accusation, every confrontation from family members who had lost a man they loved. But for 11 months, they had maintained their story with the seamless coordination only twins can achieve. Each one the other's perfect alibi, each one the other's perfect mirror. And then the police found the camera, a single forgotten security device mounted above the kitchen door of Harold Whitfield's farmhouse. A camera no larger than a smoke detector, installed by Harold himself 2 years prior, after a string of rural thefts in the area. A camera that Harold had never mentioned to his grandsons, a camera that had recorded everything. By the time Judge Richard Calloway spoke the Whitfield brothers' names for the last time, the performance would be over, and the two young men who had spent nearly a year crafting the perfect lie would finally be forced to sit inside the truth they could no longer escape. The farmhouse sat on 14 acres of rolling land outside the town of Millbrook, Connecticut. Harold Whitfield had worked that land for 50 years. He had raised 3 children there, buried a wife there, and made clear in every conversation that the property would pass to his family intact. He was 78 years old, sharp-minded, and deeply private. His neighbors described him as a good man who drove the same truck for 20 years. Who grew tomatoes in summer and split his own firewood in fall. His daughter, Patricia Whitfield Hale, described her father's relationship with Caleb and Connor as complicated. The boys had grown up visiting the farm on weekends, close enough to know every corner of the property, every lock, every habit their grandfather kept. But in the years before his death, Miss Harold had confided to Patricia that he was concerned. He told her that the twins had asked him more than once about the estate, about the will, about what they stood to inherit and when. Patricia had not taken it seriously enough. She would say that in her victim impact statement, her voice barely holding together at the seams. The 911 call came in on April 12th, at 7:43 in the morning. The caller was Caleb Whitfield. His voice was steady, measured, almost rehearsed in the way grief sometimes sounds when it has been prepared in advance. He told the dispatcher that he and his brother had arrived at their grandfather's farmhouse for a routine Sunday morning visit and had found Harold collapsed in the kitchen. He said they had tried to revive him. He said they were devastated. He used that word specifically. Devastated. the first responders arrived at 7:57. Harold Whitfield was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial assessment listed probable cause of death as cardiac arrest, consistent with the age and health profile of a 78-year-old man. The medical examiner was called. The body was transported, and Caleb and Connor Whitfield sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, accepting coffee from a neighbor who had heard the sirens, their eyes red, their hands folded in their laps. Detective Sonia Moraes arrived at 9. She was 41 years old, a 14-year veteran of the Fairfield County Major Crimes Unit, and she had a particular instinct for cases that looked clean on the surface but felt wrong underneath. She walked through the farmhouse methodically, room by room, noting what was present and what was absent. The kitchen was too clean. Not hospital clean, not bleach clean, but the specific kind of clean that comes from surfaces wiped in a hurry. A ceramic mug sat in the drying rack, freshly washed. The kitchen table had been recently moved, its legs leaving faint drag marks on the linoleum floor. She noted all of it without saying a word. She spoke with the twins separately, and she noticed something that would become significant later. Their accounts were not merely similar. They were identical. Not the kind of identical that comes from two people experiencing the same event together, but the kind that comes from two people rehearsing the same version of events until the words are as smooth and automatic as breathing. Same details, same sequence, same pauses in the same places. She submitted a request for a full forensic sweep of the property the following morning. The medical examiner's report came back 3 days later and changed everything. Harold Whitfield had not died of cardiac arrest. The toxicology panel revealed elevated levels of potassium chloride in his bloodstream, administered in a concentration inconsistent with any natural process. He had been poisoned, deliberately, precisely, by someone who understood what they were doing and had access to medical knowledge. A background check on the Whitfield brothers produced one detail that Detective Maris circled twice in her notes. Connor Whitfield had completed 2 years of a nursing program before dropping out. He had studied pharmacology. He had studied drug interactions. But he had studied exactly what a lethal potassium chloride injection does to the human heart. The case was reclassified as a homicide investigation. When the twins were brought in for second interviews, the composure they had worn so effortlessly began to develop hairline fractures. Caleb shifted in his seat when asked about Connor's nursing background. Connor stared at the table when asked about his knowledge of potassium chloride. They still said the same things in the same order, but the pauses were longer now, and in those pauses, Detective Moraes could see them recalculating. She let them leave. She needed one more thing. The security camera had been spotted by a member of the forensic team during the kitchen sweep. It was partially obscured by a hanging plant, its lens aimed at the back door in the area near the kitchen counter. The device was connected to a local hard drive stored in Harold's study, a simple system that overwrote footage every 30 days. The date of Harold's death fell inside that window. The footage was intact. Prosecutor Diana Okafor stood before the jury on the first day of trial and delivered her opening statement with the controlled intensity of someone who has been carrying a secret and is finally permitted to speak it. She told the jury about Harold Whitfield, about the land he had worked, about the will he had updated 11 months before his death, a will that left the majority of the estate to a land conservation trust rather than to his grandchildren. A decision Harold had made after growing deeply uncomfortable with their repeated questions about the property. She told the jury that Caleb and Connor had known about this change, and that Harold had told them directly, that a confrontation had taken place 3 weeks before his death, and that multiple witnesses had heard raised voices from inside the farmhouse on that occasion. She told the jury that on the morning of April 12th, the twins had not arrived for a routine visit. They had arrived with a plan, and then she told the jury about the camera. The defense attorney, Frederick Ashe, was sharp and experienced. He presented the twins as grieving young men trapped by a prosecution narrative built on assumption. He questioned the chain of custody on the toxicology samples. He challenged witnesses who had testified to the argument they overheard. He suggested that the security footage, not yet played for the jury, could be interpreted in multiple ways. Caleb and Connor sat at the defense table throughout the first week of trial, with the studied stillness of men who have convinced themselves the story they told is real. They wore matching navy blazers. They answered questions in calm, measured voices. They had rehearsed this too. The courtroom on the day the footage was played was so silent that the soft hum of the projection equipment felt intrusive. Judge Calloway had ruled the footage admissible after 2 days of pretrial hearings in which Frederick Ashe argued, without success, that it had been improperly documented. Diana Okafor systematically dismantled each objection, and the judge agreed that the footage met every evidentiary standard required. The lights did not dim, but everyone seemed to lean forward at once as the screen flickered to life. The timestamp in the upper left corner read, April 12th, 6:04 in the morning. Harold Whitfield was visible in the kitchen, moving with the slow but purposeful rhythm of a man who had followed the same morning routine for decades. He filled a kettle at the sink. He set it on the stove. He sat down at the kitchen table with a newspaper. At 6:17, Caleb and Connor Whitfield entered through the back door. The footage had no audio, but it did not need any. What it showed in the next 9 minutes was visible to everyone in the courtroom with absolute clarity. Harold Whitfield, startled by his grandson's early arrival, stood from the table. There was an exchange, bodies close together, hands moving, a posture of confrontation rather than greeting. Harold reached for the counter as if to steady himself. Connor moved behind him. Caleb moved to the other side of the kitchen. What happened in the final 3 minutes of that footage caused 2 jurors to look away from the screen. When the video ended, the courtroom remained silent for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then someone in the gallery began to cry softly. Then another. Then the sound of Frederick Ashe pushing his chair back from the table, a gesture of a man reassessing everything. Caleb and Connor Whitfield did not look at each other. They did not look at the screen. They stared at the table in front of them, with expressions that had finally shed their rehearsed composure and revealed something rawer underneath. Not remorse, not grief. Something closer to the particular blankness that settles over a person when the scaffolding they have spent a year building collapses all at once. Diana Okafor did not speak for a long moment. When she did, she said simply, "For the record, this footage has been verified by 3 independent digital forensics experts as unaltered and continuous. There are no edits. There are no cuts. What you saw is what happened. Frederick Ashe requested a brief recess. It was granted. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Caleb Whitfield told his attorney that he wanted to discuss the possibility of a plea. Connor, when informed through their respective counsel, said nothing for a long time. Then he said the same thing. The negotiations lasted 4 days. The brothers ultimately declined to enter a guilty plea and returned to trial, a decision that legal observers found difficult to understand. Ashe later explained that his clients had convinced themselves, even after seeing the video, that reasonable doubt still existed, that what the camera showed could still be explained. The jury deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. When they returned to the courtroom, the 4 women stood and read the verdicts in a voice that did not waver. Caleb Whitfield, guilty of murder in the first degree. Connor Whitfield, guilty of murder in the first degree. Patricia Whitfield. Hale, seated in the front row of the gallery, pressed both hands over her mouth. Her husband put his arm around her. Several other family members sat very still, in the way people sit when the thing they have been waiting for finally arrives, and turns out to be both relief and devastation at once. At the defense table, neither twin reacted visibly. They sat with their hands folded, their navy blazers still pressed, hiding their faces finally unreadable in a way that was no longer strategic. The sentencing hearing took place 6 weeks later. Patricia Whitfield Hale delivered her victim impact statement first. She stood at the podium and spoke about her father, with the careful precision of a woman who has thought about these words for a long time and is determined to get them exactly right. She said that Harold Whitfield had built his life with his hands, that he had worked the land through drought years and flood years and years when the markets paid nothing, and he worked anyway because the land was not just property to him. It was identity. It was continuity. It was something that was supposed to outlast him. She said that in the last months of his life, her father had mentioned he felt uneasy around the boys, that he had loved them, and in the complicated way grandparents sometimes love grandchildren who disappoint them, and that the unease had not killed the love, it had just made him careful. She said she wished he had been more careful. She turned and looked at Caleb and Connor directly. He was your family, she said. He fed you at that table. He taught you how to drive on that property. And you walked through his door at 6 a.m, and you killed him for money he had already decided not to leave you. I need you to understand that. He had already decided. It was already done. You killed a man for something you were never going to have anyway. The silence after she stepped down from the podium was the kind that fills a room completely. Judge Calloway addressed the twins before pronouncing sentence. He said that in 30 years on the bench, he had observed many defendants who maintained their innocence through the full course of a trial. He respected that right. He did not hold it against them. What he held against Caleb and Connor Whitfield was the specific nature of their crime. Not simply that they had killed their grandfather, but that they had planned it with deliberate care, executed it in a way designed to mimic natural death, and then spent 11 months looking into the faces of the people who loved Harold Whitfield and repeating a story they knew was false. That sustained deception, he said, was its own form of cruelty, entirely separate from the act itself. He noted that the only reason the truth had been uncovered was a camera Harold Whitfield had installed to protect his property from strangers. The irony of that, he said, did not escape him. The sentence handed down to each brother was life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs moved to secure them, the two brothers finally looked at each other. It was the first time in the entire proceedings that they had broken their parallel forward gaze. What passed between them in that look was impossible to read from the gallery, but it lasted only a second before they were both turned toward the door. And then they were gone, side by side as they had entered everything in their lives, as they would now exit it. Harold Whitfield's farmhouse was transferred to the Land Conservation Trust as specified in his will. The 14 acres he had worked for 50 years are preserved now. The fields and the tree lines and the long gravel driveway unchanged. Patricia Whitfield Hale visits in the spring. She says it still smells like her father's truck. She says she is grateful the land is still there. The kitchen camera Harold installed 2 years before his death still hangs above the back door. Nobody has taken it down. Nobody seems to want to. There is a particular kind of arrogance that convinces people a crime can be made invisible if it is done carefully enough, that a plan thorough enough becomes airtight, that the right story told with the right composure will hold together forever. Caleb and Connor Whitfield believed all of that. They believed it for 11 months while the footage sat undiscovered on a hard drive in a quiet farmhouse study. They believed it through 2 interviews with Detective Morass. They believed it through indictment and arraignment in the first week of trial. And they believed it right up until the moment a projection screen illuminated everything they had done, and the room they were sitting in had nowhere left to look but at them. Harold Whitfield did not get to see justice, but Harold Whitfield built the thing that delivered it. He mounted a small device above his kitchen door because he wanted to protect his home. And in the end, that is exactly what it did. The moment that footage appeared on the courtroom screen, 11 months of carefully constructed lies collapsed in under 9 minutes. 2 men who had shared a face, a strategy, and a crime now share something they never planned for: a sentence, a cell, and the permanent record of what they chose to do on an April morning before the town of Millbrook woke up. Justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it was already recording. And if this story stayed with you, press like and subscribe. Cases like Harold Whitfield's deserve to be remembered. Every week there is another story the world almost missed. Stay here, and you will not miss it.